We never owned any game consoles when we were kids. You know, we would play video games at our friends' houses, but when we were home, all we had to play was, I think, Tetris on our really old computer. I'm pretty sure Tetris was the only game we had. But all that changed one fateful day when we received as a gift from a relative their old computer, as well as all the games that they had for it. And among those games were the 1994 King's Quest collection. And my life would never be the same. This collection included the first 6 games, as well as the remake of the first game, a preview of the 7th game, and several behind-the-scenes videos and interviews, and it was amazing. Sure, the games were a little more old-fashioned than the ones our friends were playing, but we were blown away by this incredible world of Daventry and all these characters and adventures and puzzles. It was an entirely new experience for us, and it was awesome. The games were certainly difficult for kids our age, sometimes downright brutal, but we loved every single minute of them. And even though, now that I've grown up and can revisit the games, I prefer some of them over others, I will still be a King's Quest fan until the day I die. So this past month has been very interesting for me. This past month saw the release of 2 major King's Quest fan projects, Episode 3 of The Silver Lining, and AGDI's King's Quest III Redux, as well as a very important announcement from Telltale Games regarding the future of the King's Quest franchise. The Silver Lining is a King's Quest fan project developed by Phoenix Online Studios. They've been working on it for about 11 years now, and have even gotten shut down by King's Quest copyright owners twice. 2 separate copyright owners, and each time they managed to come to an agreement that allowed the game to continue on. The goal of the game was to create a far more satisfying conclusion to the King's Quest saga than Mask of Eternity was, which wouldn't be hard to do, but they're trying to tie in events from all the games together and unmask this vast conspiracy, which is something a lot of the fan projects like to do, due to the mention in King's Quest VI of a Society of the Black Cloak, which is never followed up on, never explained. It's really only used as a prop to make sure you can incriminate the Vizier somehow. But it's pretty much the only really unanswered question of the King's Quest series, so naturally it's the one that the fan projects like to jump on. In fact, my brother and I have been working on a fan project for some time. I don't know if it'll ever see the light of day, but we too are starting with the Black Cloak Society and thinking, okay, what's their story? Yeah, that's something that may not ever come out, but it's fun to work on. But so far, the Silver Lining has had better luck than we have in that it's actually been completed. Well, at least 3 chapters have anyway. I'm going to talk briefly about just my opinions on the game overall, because I don't think I've done that on the blog yet. The game is interesting. It's mostly enjoyable, but it has many flaws. Many flaws. First off, I'll start with the good things. It is an incredible achievement to make a full 3D game almost from scratch, for free, just everybody volunteering their time and effort. It's a massive undertaking, you know? I mean, feature-length Star Wars fan films are a massive undertaking, but a film is much easier to make. As hard as it gets, it's much easier to make, I think, than a game. And the fact that they have pulled off what they've pulled off deserves nothing less than the utmost respect. Aside from a few dream sequences, so far the game takes place entirely at the Land of the Green Isles from King's Quest VI, which I'm okay with because King's Quest VI was far and away my favorite game in the original series. It's such a great setting for a game because it has so many diverse locales that lend to really interesting atmosphere, and just seeing new elements of the island. I mean, I know they're not officially sanctioned, but it's still cool to see fan interpretations of other places of the island. Not to mention just seeing the things of the island in 3D. It's a real treat, and I don't think it's necessarily better than the paintings from the original game, but it's a new way of looking at them, and it's pretty awesome. You get to play as Graham again, who obviously, he's the original hero of the King's Quest series. For many people, he's the true icon, and it's always fun to play as Graham, even though the King's Quest series wasn't very character or personality driven for the protagonist. You know, none of the characters were as identifiable as a personality as, like, Guybrush Threepwood, but the characters still had fairly distinct characterizations, and certainly everybody had their own distinct look. So it's a treat to get to play once again as the original hero, as King Graham, even if only for nostalgic reasons. The voice acting is mostly very good. Unlike many fan projects which get Josh Mandel, who was the original voice of Graham and a former Sierra designer, to come back and return as Graham, they got a new actor who has very similar vocal qualities to Josh Mandel, but I think is a slightly better actor. And I'm not saying that to slight Josh Mandel, I'm just saying this guy actually seems like an actor, while Josh Mandel was a Sierra employee who recorded voices. And again, I love Josh Mandel as Graham, but I really am enjoying this particular Graham performance. Most of the characters from the previous games, nobody's doing spot-on impressions, but everybody, for the most part, is doing good interpretations of the character and good performances. This is also the first time in the King's Quest series we have a female narrator, and the woman playing the narrator is mostly very good when she's allowed to be funny. King's Quest narrators have always been slightly snarky, not nearly as much as Space Quest narrators, obviously, but the King's Quest narrator has always sort of got their tongue in their cheek. You think of King's Quest VI, where the narrator played by Bill Ratner from G.I. Joe was very, very much the source of a lot of the humor in the game. He had that great dry wit when you were looking at objects or trying weird interactions with objects. And when the new narrator is allowed to be funny, she's pretty funny. She insults Graham a lot, and it's a blast to hear. There's one particularly hilarious moment in the latest chapter, a very fourth wall breaking moment where you can click look on a certain item in the pawn shop, and there's just this incredibly long dialogue that is mind-blowingly fourth wall breaking. I loved it. Even though it felt really out of place, I was still enjoying every minute of that particular conversation. Let's just say it involves the bowls, and you take it from there, and I thought that was hilarious. But it illustrated one of the key problems of the Silver Lining, which is it is really melodramatic. I mentioned the narrator is great when she's allowed to be funny, but most of the time her narration is just so mopey and depressing. You know, you click look on any random item and she starts going, and, oh, Graham remembers spending warm Daventry nights by the fire. He laments the fact that his children are now in a coma and may not be able to spend warm nights in the fire again. He shudders to think that maybe he will never spend time with his children again, and so on and so on and on. I noticed there's an option that you can choose short narrations. I haven't tried it, so I don't know if that problem is improved at all, but the game has such a melancholy tone, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but they're really piling it on. It's interesting because, so much of the game is an attempt to bring King's Quest back to its roots, bringing back the old characters, the old locations, reminiscent of the old interface, and yet the tone of the story is most reminiscent of Mask of Eternity. And it's such a weird context thing. And I mean, the game is called The Silver Lining, so I'm sure there will eventually be an optimistic note, but so much of the game is just so depressing, and the funny parts, most of them work, but it's just such a weird juxtaposition. I was telling my sister about it, and she said, so it's like it's like the second Pirates movie. And I'm like, that's exactly what it's like. And I'm saying this as someone who enjoyed the entire Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy, but the second one especially, so much of it was so dark that I felt like they tried too hard with the funny parts to make up for the dark parts. It's so much of the movie is dark, but there's that incredibly silly scene on the cannibal island that just goes on for too long and is just silly and wacky and really not very entertaining. And you feel like they only put it in to offset the darkness of the rest of the movie. The humor in this game isn't nearly as bad as that scene, but it's a similar dichotomy between the darkness and the few moments of levity. Also, every conversation is really long. I mean, every character just pours out backstory, exposition, emotion, and I want to know all this. I want to explore the backstory they've created, but a lot of times I'm like, just get on with it. And I said most of the voice acting was good, but there are some people who aren't necessarily bad, they're just wrong for the role. For For example, the guy who plays Ali, the bookstore owner. Now, this takes place something like 3 to 5 years after King's Quest VI, but whoever's playing Ali sounds about 60 years younger than Ali in King's Quest VI. And you know, Ali in King's Quest VI was voiced by the legendary Don Messick, who was, among others, the original voice of Scooby-Doo and Boo Boo Bear. He has a long history of voice acting, no longer with us, and a lot of the voice actors in King's Quest VI, it's really hard to fill their shoes. But the guy playing Ali, it was a fine performance, but he just sounded like such a young guy, and that just completely wasn't right for the character. What else? I mean, and like the guy playing Saladin was okay, but how do you fill Tony J's shoes, you know? How do you replace Tony J when you're doing a voice?
I'll find her. I'll find her if I have to burn down all of Paris.
This game was also really buggy, at least episode 3 was. The first 2 episodes had no problem running in crossover, but I tried installing this one on both my MacBooks in crossover, and it wouldn't work on either. I eventually borrowed my sister's Dell laptop and installed it on there, and even then it crashed every couple of minutes. And again, everybody working on this game is doing it for free. They're all volunteering. We can't necessarily hold them to the same standards as we could if we were paying customers, and I'm sure they're working on these issues and trying to get them fixed, but I'm just presenting that as a warning. It's a bit distracting. And I say all these things, I have all these criticisms. I still enjoyed the game mostly, and I mean, it got dark to the point of silliness, but I'm still really interested in seeing how this story unfolds. I just love seeing fan interpretations of the King's Quest universe and fan interpretations of what's going on throughout the stories. Because let's face it, the first 2 games, not very story-driven, and it's interesting to see them weave elements of that into an actual coherent story. And I look forward to seeing how the rest of the game plays out, even though it could have been so much better, but I'm not complaining too much because I like it, and once again, I'm just in awe that they were able to pull it off. So congratulations to the entire Phoenix Online Studios team. It's a really impressive achievement. You should be very proud of what you've accomplished, but you should also listen to the criticism so your next game can be even better. But you're an inspiration to fan creators everywhere, and I can't wait to see how the rest of the story unfolds. The other big King's Quest fan game to come out recently is King's Quest III Redux from Anonymous Game Developers Interactive. Now, AGDI was originally Tierra Entertainment, and they've made several Sierra fan remakes, as well as an original title under their Himalaya Studios banner, and I believe after this they're moving entirely to original titles, and I look forward to seeing where they go with those. Their remake of King's Quest I is basically a play-by-play remake of the official remake of King's Quest I, the official SCI remake. It plays out exactly the same, but with updated graphics and interface based on the one from King's Quest V and VI, and full voices, including Josh Mandel, the original voice of Graham. It's pretty neat. It's not necessarily worth checking out if you've played the original King's Quest I so many times. I mean, unless you're really interested in seeing a fan project. But it's a good introduction to the King's Quest series because it's not so old-fashioned that it'll be off-putting, but it has all the purity of the original game. So if you've never played a King's Quest game, I suggest starting out with AGDI's fan remake of King's Quest I. But their remake of King's Quest II is really, really awesome. I say that The Silver Lining may be the most impressive fan project of all time, but King's Quest II Plus is my favorite fan project of all time in any franchise. This thing is amazing. It takes the bare bones elements of the original King's Quest II, but expands them, twists them, puts in surprises. If you've played the original King's Quest II, you'll recognize so many of the things, but you'll also be very surprised at a lot of what they do. It expands the story, and like The Silver Lining, it ties it in with the other games, but it does it in a slightly less melancholy way. It's still pretty dark for King's Quest standards, but it's not so mopey, and it has an optimistic tone at the end. It's very fun, it's very exciting, I recommend it to every King's Quest fan, and it's a very tough act to follow. Now, King's Quest III Redux, they've made it clear that they're calling it Redux because it's a little bit expanded, but not nearly as expanded as their King's Quest II remake was. Now, first off, there already is a pretty well done King's Quest III fan remake by Infamous Adventures. And it's a more one-to-one remake like AGDI's King's Quest I remake. The only real expansions in Infamous Adventures remake is they added some new cutscenes to sort of expand on the story a little bit, which are well done, and they go into, you know, what Graham's going through during this time, and, you know, Graham and Alexander finally reuniting. It's a pretty solid remake. King's Quest III Redux by AGDI, again, adds more puzzles. Like King's Quest II Plus, not nearly as many. Some of them good, some of them kind of filler. There's a puzzle involving a character from King's Quest IV showing up that just feels like padding. And it's kind of fun to see the character, but it doesn't really add much. There are actually a couple of cameos in this game that feel more like fan service than anything else and feel more like padding. There's a certain cameo, an unspeaking cameo, by... I'm just going to spoil it now. Cedric appears in this game, Cedric from King's Quest V. He doesn't talk at all, and when you try to click talk on him, it says, "Don't be silly, owls can't talk." Which is funny, but doesn't make any sense in the context of the game, because you've clicked talk on a bunch of other animals already.
Graham, watch out! A poisonous snake!
There's also a cameo towards the end by the villain from their King's Quest II remake. It expands the story of their King's Quest II remake, but it doesn't really answer any of the questions. In fact, it kind of just raises more questions, and I was sort of hoping for a real conclusion to their King's Quest saga, but it's really just more like acknowledging that their King's Quest fan saga exists, but not really solving anything from it. There's also a series of puzzles on the Treasure Island, which, again, feel kind of like padding, but at least they're fun padding. You know, for the most part, these are fun, interesting puzzles, and they're worth checking out. So while the game's not quite the masterpiece that I think their King's Quest II remake was, it's still really worth checking out, even if you've already played other King's Quest III versions. A marked improvement is the way they handle the timer system. It sort of turns yellow to give you a warning when Mananan will be coming back soon, and then it turns red when you're really running out of time. So there's less living in fear. And also, there's less time killing because you can have Gwydion go to sleep, and he'll just wake up when Mananan comes back, or when Mananan needs him again, or when Mananan's about to leave again. So it saves a lot of the just waiting around that made King's Quest III kind of tedious. It's still got all the spell making, but you don't need to check your manual, don't worry. It's no longer a copy protection issue. The voice acting, you know, solid voice acting all around. The artwork, you know, background paintings, they're all very beautiful. It's just a shame that it's in such low resolution, because this game would look amazing in HD, but I don't think Adventure Game Studio is capable of HD. At least not yet. They even decided to fix all those annoying little spatial inconsistencies that always bugged me in the original game. And the music is phenomenal. It weaves in all the themes from the original King's Quest III, as well as several themes and motifs from other games in the King's Quest series, and weaves them all in seamlessly. You know, you recognize a bit of a melody from, say, King's Quest V or VI, but it's not distracting you. You're not thinking, wait a second, that's not from this game. It's just conjuring up all the emotions that it's supposed to conjure up. And only later do you realize, hey, wait, that was the theme from that scene in King's Quest VI, and that worked perfectly. It's such a great soundtrack, and I can't wait to download it and have it on my iPod. So, to sum up, King's Quest III Redux, not quite as amazing as King's Quest II Plus, but still very worth checking out, even if you've already played other versions of King's Quest III. In fact, Infamous Adventures King's Quest III is also still worth checking out. They've both got their pros and cons, and it's worth comparing the two of them. And if you're the kind of person who doesn't have time to play two separate fan-made remakes of the same game, then you're the kind of person who doesn't have time to be watching my vlog, so I'm not even talking to you. So, check out both of them, and enjoy. Finally, our latest bit of King's Quest news comes to us from our old friends at Telltale Games. Telltale recently announced that they have acquired a bunch of new licenses. It's actually interesting. This is the first announcement they've made in a while about licenses that I don't particularly care about or hadn't heard of before. You know, for a long time it was all like Strong Bad, then Monkey Island, you know, Wallace and Gromit. It was all Back to the Future. It was all things that I really wanted to see done well as adventure games. So I was so excited for so long. Then this latest announcement comes, and a couple of them are like, okay. Oh, Walking Dead. Yeah, I keep meaning to get around to actually seeing that, or reading the comic and all that. But among the announcements was King's Quest, and this really intrigues me. And I mentioned briefly in my post for my review of Back to the Future, it's not a marriage that I saw coming, because let's face it, Telltale games are very easy. Almost stupidly easy sometimes. And I played Telltale not for the gameplay, but for the characters and the stories and the humor. King's Quest games, on the other hand, and all Sierra games, are much more difficult. Again, sometimes stupidly difficult. I'm going to admit it, there are several puzzles in the original King's Quest series that I think are really stupid and shouldn't have been there. Meanwhile, all the puzzles in Telltale, even the stupid ones, I'm like, well, at least it didn't take long to figure out. So, it'd be interesting to really see if they can pull this off, and there are going to be people who aren't satisfied. A lot of people still weren't satisfied with Tales of Monkey Island, which, I mean, okay, gameplay-wise, I didn't really care one way or the other than the face-off, which was awesome and had all the fun of insult sword fighting without the tedium. But gameplay-wise, mostly I didn't care. Story-wise, it might have been my favorite in the series. If not my favorite, then a very close runner-up. But that's the thing that Telltale does well, is story and characters. And the one thing that I've always found that they do, in my opinion anyway, is they always nail the tone of whatever the franchise they're adapting is. You know, for all its flaws, Back to the Future feels so much like a Back to the Future story. Wallace and Gromit feels like Wallace and Gromit shorts. Sam and Max feels like Sam and Max. Strong Bad feels like an interactive Homestar Runner cartoon. You know, everything feels right. And I'm hoping they can capture whatever they do to replicate the tone of the game and sort of leak that over into gameplay style. And again, I'm not saying I want anything ridiculously complex. I don't necessarily want dead ends or anything. But a King's Quest game definitely needs to be more challenging than the Back to the Future game is. And I'm hoping that they know what the appeal of King's Quest is. If they sought out the King's Quest license, they must have a reason to seek it out. And I'm sure that they know why people like King's Quest, and I hope that they do their best to replicate it and don't spend the whole time trying to fix King's Quest. Now, they keep referring to it as a reboot, but they also say it's a reboot like we rebooted Monkey Island. And Monkey Island was a follow-up, not a reboot in the Hollywood Christopher Nolan doing Batman sense of the word. So, I'm not sure if this is going to be a reboot or a sequel. And I'm not sure which I'd prefer. A reboot might be interesting in the sense of going back in and re-exploring earlier periods in Graham's life. That might be fun. But I also don't want to undo the canon of the original King's Quest saga. And, you know, a follow-up, a Where Are They Now, might be just as much fun, if not more fun. But one thing I hope is, as much as I talk about how I enjoy the stories that tie the series together, I hope Telltale doesn't try to do that for a couple of reasons. One, I think it'd be great to return to the roots of King's Quest, simple fairy tale stories and puzzles and adventures. Two, I don't want there to suddenly be a canon explanation for everything, because I'm enjoying as many different fan interpretations as I can get, and I don't want all of those to be undone by Telltale coming in and saying, nope, this is what King's Quest is now. The Black Cloak Society was just a front for money laundering. Because apparently King's Quest takes place in the 1930s. I've been playing Back to the Future too much. But in short, a lot going on for King's Quest fans, and all I can say is, as a fan, even if not everything turns out well, even if some of the fan games suck, even if Telltale really drops the ball on this one, I think it's great to see widespread interest in the franchise again. It makes me feel a little less alone in my King's Quest fandom, because after all, when my brother and I were kids, we were playing King's Quest while everyone else was on their N64s playing GoldenEye. I think we had more fun than they did, but, you know, it's great to find so many other people who are interested in the King's Quest series, and I wish for the best for this franchise in the future. I hope Telltale's game is good, but even if it's not, people are talking about King's Quest, and as far as I'm concerned, that's a good thing.